Hey, check it out. Back it up. Yeah. Drop it down. Make it shake. Ow! History, 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 history.
Before Wi-Fi, before radio, did someone really try to invent long-distance communication powered by sympathy? And what if you could text someone without electricity using snails, telepathy, and pure vibes? Welcome to What You Didn't Hear, a history podcast that dives into the lesser-known, weird, obscure, and sometimes crazy events that were passed up by the history books and never taught to us in class. Today we're going to take a deep dive into the diverse world of history in the late 18th century, a French occultist, snail mating rituals, and long-distance wireless communication. Jacques-Toussaint Benoît was a French inventor and experimenter who lived during a time where the boundaries between science and the supernatural weren't as clearly defined as they are today. The late 18th century, a period shaped heavily by the age of Enlightenment, when science, reason, and experimentation were rapidly evolving alongside lingering mystical traditions. While Enlightenment thinkers emphasized rationality, many individuals, including otherwise serious intellectuals, remained fascinated by alchemy, magnetism, and esoteric philosophies. Benoît is believed to have worked on early electrical or mechanical experiments. Though records of his inventions are sparse, like many lesser-known inventors of his era, he operated outside major academic institutions, which means much of his work wasn't formally documented or widely preserved. What sets Benoît apart and makes him particularly interesting is his reported involvement in occult practices. During the late 1700s, it wasn't unusual for inventors and thinkers to explore the ideas that blended science with mysticism. Benoît is said to have shown interest in alchemy, the precursor to modern chemistry, which sought not only material transformation, like turning lead into gold, but also spiritual enlightenment. Engaged with ideas similar to animal magnetism, popularized later by Franz Mesmer, which proposed invisible natural forces influencing human health and behavior. Benoît also explored esoteric philosophies, possibly including symbolic rituals or attempts to uncover hidden forces governing nature. Rather than being purely supernatural, these pursuits were often seen at the time as cutting-edge attempts to understand the unseen mechanisms of the universe, essentially early, if misguided, scientific exploration. Even though Benoît isn't a major historical figure, he represents a broader truth about the Enlightenment. It wasn't purely rational. Many thinkers existed in a gray area where science, philosophy, and mysticism overlapped. Today, we will be focusing in on one of Benoît's more grand inventions, the Pasilalinic-Sympathetic Compass. The issue with communication in the 1700s was all messages were hand-delivered. This could lead to problems with tampering, time delays between sending communication and receiving responses, and the possibility of your letter never arriving with no real means of tracking its progress. A solution would be an instantaneous communication device where the sender could punch in a message and it be received on the other side with no middleman and no delay. If only we had something like this today. But as it turns out, we came very close to a solution when a French self-proclaimed inventor set out to build such a device. Benoît hypothesized that when snails mate, they form a permanent sympathetic bond that travels across space, meaning that what affects one snail would affect its mate as well. The bond would be formed by an escargotic fluid that forms an invisible thread, and via animal magnetism, the pair of snails would communicate across this thread, similar to how electricity flows across a wire. However, Jacques Benoît did not have the funding to build his device and prove his hypothesis. Benoît persuaded a gymnasium manager in Paris to give him lodging and a working allowance by convincing him of the importance of his discovery. While that seems crazy, the idea and possibility of instantaneous communication across great and even infinite distances, it's not really all that surprising that Benoît was able to find someone to support his endeavor. After a year, Monsieur Triot, the gymnasium manager, grew impatient under the suspicion that he was being scammed and demanded to see a working model of this invention. And Benoît delivered. The apparatus consisted of a scaffold of 10-foot-long wooden beams, supporting zinc bowls lined with a cloth soaked in a copper sulfate solution. The cloth was held in place by a line of copper. At the bottom of each of the 24 basins was a snail, glued in place, and each associated with a different letter of the alphabet. An identical second device held the paired snails. To transmit a letter, the operator touched one of the snails. This was supposed to cause a reaction in the corresponding snail on the other side, which could then be read by the receiving operator. Finally, the fateful day came. On October 2nd, 1850, Benoît invited Triot and his friend/journalist Jules Alex from the local Parisian journal called La Presse to come and witness the fruits of his labor. Benoît had the two witnesses stand at one end of the device while he remained at the receiving end. He instructed them to spell out a word, and he would tell them what the word was by reading it from his end. One of the words chosen to transmit was gymnase. However, on Benoît's end, he read out some word like gaimiote. In addition to his error, Benoît continually walked between the two devices and claimed that it was necessary to supervise his two assistants to make sure they were touching and reading the snails correctly. Triot, already doubtful of Benoît, began to suspect this was a hoax. But Alex was convinced by the error-filled demonstration and wrote an article praising Benoît's discovery. His article was published in La Presse on October 26, 1850. Alex not only praised the creation, he also suggested that the devices could be worn on a woman's waist chain, so they could communicate messages while on the move. I'm not really sure how large a waist chain is, or what a waist chain is, but this machine seems kind of large and cumbersome to me. I guess Parisian women in the 1850s were robust and up to the task. I wasn't there, so I'll trust Alex's judgment. However, Triot was not convinced. Due to Benoît's constant traveling between devices, Triot assumed there was some form of trickery in this snail-mail device. He demanded a second test with strict guidelines. Benoît, full of confidence and determined to prove his theory of mated snails' ability to communicate across space, agreed to these terms. But when the agreed-upon date came, Benoît was nowhere to be found. It should be mentioned that when I was doing my research for this episode, as well as Benoît, he had a partner who helped him design his inventions. He was an American colleague named Biot Sheraton. However, I could not find any confirmation that this American colleague actually existed. Nobody ever saw him. There was no records of any letters sent between the two. There wasn't really anything solid to go off of that proved to me that he was real. So ultimately, I decided to omit him from this episode. In early 1852, Benoît was spotted wandering the streets of Paris, penniless and homeless, shortly before passing away. So here we are, a snail-powered, sympathy-based communication device that didn't work, created by a man who dared to imagine something completely different. And while it may seem ridiculous now, the goal behind it wasn't. Instant communication, something we rely on every single day. So maybe the real question is, if Benoît had somehow succeeded, would we be carrying around smartphones today? Or would we all just have tiny boxes filled with emotionally connected snails, aggressively spinning dials to send texts? We would say, "Hey, did you get my message?" And the other person would respond, "Hold on, my snails are buffering." Thank you for listening to What You Didn't Hear. If you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to follow, share, and come back next time for another story you definitely didn't learn in class. Until then, stay curious.
Make it shake.